Ready for a Revolutionary War romance that will leave you breathless? This passionate tale of a Patriot spy and her British captor proves that love knows no boundaries, even in the midst of war. Subscribe now and hit the notification bell so you never miss our heart-stopping historical romances filled with forbidden love, dangerous secrets, and impossible choices that will keep you on the edge of your seat. The Spy Who Loved Her Captor. Chapter 1. Captured in the Night. The rope burns on Isabel Montgomery's wrists had begun to bleed, but she forced herself to remain motionless in the wooden chair where they had bound her 3 hours ago. The British garrison headquarters in Charleston reeked of tobacco smoke and unwashed bodies, a testament to the long months of occupation that had worn down both conqueror and conquered alike. Through the grimy window, she could see the harbor where British ships sat at anchor like sleeping leviathans, their masts piercing the grey dawn sky that promised another sweltering day in the Carolina Lowcountry. At 22, Isabel had been passing intelligence to the Continental forces for nearly 2 years, using her position as a seamstress in the homes of Charleston's remaining Loyalist families to gather information about troop movements, supply schedules, and strategic plans. Her cover had been perfect. Who would suspect a quiet young woman whose only crime appeared to be exceptional skill with needle and thread? But perfection, she was learning, had a way of crumbling when least expected. The door creaked open, and Colonel William Ashworth entered with the measured stride of a man accustomed to absolute authority. He was younger than she had expected for someone of his rank, perhaps 30, with the kind of refined bearing that spoke of good breeding and expensive education. His scarlet uniform was immaculate despite the humid climate, every brass button polished to mirror brightness, every piece of leather gleaming with careful attention. Dark hair was pulled back in a perfect queue, and intelligent grey eyes studied her with an intensity that made her skin crawl. "Miss Montgomery," he said, settling into the chair across from her with deliberate casualness. "Or should I say, the infamous Charleston Sparrow." His accent carried the crisp consonants of English nobility, the kind of speech that had become synonymous with oppression in the minds of most colonists. "Your reputation precedes you, though I must admit I expected someone more formidable." Isabel kept her expression carefully neutral, drawing on 2 years of practice at maintaining her cover under pressure. "I'm afraid you're mistaken, Colonel. I'm simply a seamstress, trying to make an honest living in difficult times." Her voice carried the slight breathlessness she had perfected to suggest feminine fragility, though her mind was racing through possible escape scenarios and contingency plans her handlers had drilled into her. Ashworth smiled, but there was no warmth in the expression. "Indeed? Then perhaps you can explain how a simple seamstress came to possess detailed plans of our fortifications, complete with guard rotations and ammunition stores." He produced a roll of papers from his coat, spreading them across the table between them. Isabel's heart sank as she recognized her own careful handwriting, documenting intelligence she had gathered over the past month. The papers represented weeks of careful observation, conversations overheard while fitting gowns for officers' wives, glimpses caught of documents left carelessly on desks while she worked. Each piece of information had been painstakingly gathered and recorded, destined for the Continental forces, planning their next move against the British occupation. Now they would serve as evidence of her treason. "I've never seen those papers before in my life," she lied smoothly, though sweat had begun to gather at her temples despite the early morning chill. "Anyone could have forged my hand, planted evidence to implicate an innocent woman." Innocent. Ashworth leaned forward, his grey eyes never leaving her face. "Miss Montgomery, we have witnesses who saw you meeting with known rebel operatives. We have samples of your handwriting from legitimate seamstress work that match these intelligence reports perfectly. We know you've been using your access to Loyalist homes to gather information for the enemy." His voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. "The only question remaining is whether you'll cooperate with our investigation or face the full consequences of your treachery." The threat hung in the air between them like smoke from a musket barrel. Isabel knew the penalties for espionage, hanging for a man and for a woman, burning at the stake, or hanging depending on the commanding officer's discretion. Either way, her life was forfeit unless she could find some miracle to extract herself from this situation. "Even if your accusations were true," she said carefully, "what could you possibly offer that would make me betray my principles?" The question was dangerous, but she needed to understand what he wanted, whether there might be some slim chance of negotiation. Ashworth studied her for a long moment, and she saw something shift in his expression, calculation mixed with what might have been admiration. "Your principles," he repeated thoughtfully. "Tell me, Miss Montgomery, what exactly are you fighting for? Freedom? Independence? The right to be taxed by colonial assemblies rather than Parliament?" "I'm fighting for the right to determine our own destiny," Isabel replied, allowing some of her genuine passion to color her voice. "For the principle that government derives its authority from the consent of the governed, not from the accident of birth or the barrel of a gun." "Noble sentiments," Ashworth acknowledged. "But tell me, what has your noble cause actually accomplished? Your continental army is scattered, your currency worthless, your cities occupied. Washington retreats from every major engagement, and your so-called Congress can barely feed its own soldiers. What future are you really fighting to create?" The colonel rose and walked to the window, his hands clasped behind his back as he gazed out at the harbor. "I've been in the colonies for 3 years now, Miss Montgomery. I've seen the devastation this war has brought to ordinary people, families torn apart, farms burned, children orphaned. Is your abstract principle worth all that suffering?" Isabel felt a flicker of uncertainty at his words. She had seen the suffering too, had watched friends and neighbors lose everything to the chaos of war. There were nights when she wondered whether independence would truly bring the better world they promised, or simply replace British tyranny with American tyranny. But then she thought of her brother Thomas, killed at Cowpens while serving with the Continental Forces, and her resolve hardened. "Freedom is never achieved without sacrifice, Colonel. The question is whether we're willing to pay the price for principles that will outlive us all." Ashworth turned back to face her, something like respect flickering in his grey eyes. "You're remarkable, you know. Most spies we capture are motivated by money or personal grievance, but you truly believe in something larger than yourself." He paused, seeming to weigh his words carefully. "That makes you dangerous, but it also makes you valuable." "Valuable how?" Isabel asked, though she dreaded the answer. "Your network extends throughout the Low Country, doesn't it? Charleston, Savannah, the plantation districts. You have contacts everywhere, names, safe houses, methods of communication. That information could save hundreds of British lives and bring this war to a swifter conclusion." The scope of what he was asking struck her like a physical blow. He wasn't just asking her to betray her mission or her immediate contacts. He wanted her to destroy the entire intelligence network that had taken years to build, to condemn dozens of patriots to death or imprisonment. "Never," she whispered, then louder. "I would die first." "That can be arranged," Ashworth said quietly. "But before you embrace martyrdom, consider this. Your network is already compromised. We captured you because someone talked. One of your own people betrayed you to save themselves. Your noble principles mean nothing to them when their own lives are at stake." The words hit her like cold water. Someone had betrayed her? Who could it have been? Marcus, her primary contact? Sarah, who had helped her access the governor's mansion? Or perhaps someone she had never suspected? Someone who had been feeding information to the British all along? "You're lying," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Am I? How else do you think we knew exactly where to find you last night? How did we know you would be at the old warehouse on Broad Street at precisely midnight?" Ashworth's smile was almost sympathetic. "Your cause is lost, Miss Montgomery. Your allies have abandoned you. The only question now is whether you'll salvage something from the wreckage or go to your grave for people who care nothing for your sacrifice." Isabel closed her eyes, trying to think clearly through the fog of betrayal and despair. Everything she had believed about her mission, her comrades, her cause, was it all built on lies? Had she been fighting for principles that existed only in her own mind, while others played a more cynical game? Subscribe for the next chapter of this Revolutionary War spy thriller. Will Isabel break under pressure, or does Colonel Ashworth have a different plan entirely? Click the notification bell so you never miss our heart-pounding historical romances filled with intrigue and impossible choices. Chapter 2. The Devil's Bargain. The silence stretched between them like a taut rope, each second adding weight to the impossible choice Ashworth had presented. Isabel's mind raced through the implications of his words, analyzing every detail of her capture for clues about who might have betrayed her. The warehouse meeting had been known only to her inner circle, 5 people at most, who knew the time and location. The thought that one of them had sold her to the British felt like a knife twisting in her chest. Ashworth returned to his seat, studying her with the patience of a predator who knew his prey was trapped. "I can see you're beginning to understand the reality of your situation," he said, his voice carrying false sympathy. "Betrayal is perhaps the cruelest lesson war teaches us. Those we trust most are often the first to abandon us when the stakes become personal." "Even if someone did betray me," Isabel said, fighting to keep her voice steady, "that doesn't invalidate everything we're fighting for. One person's weakness doesn't diminish the justice of our cause." "Justice?" Ashworth laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. "Tell me about justice, Miss Montgomery. Was it just when your Continental forces burned the Hartley plantation and left 3 children homeless? Was it just when your militia hanged David Morrison without trial because someone accused him of loyalist sympathies? Your cause may have noble goals, but your methods are often indistinguishable from common banditry." Each example he cited struck home because Isabel knew they were true. She had heard whispers of such incidents, had tried to tell herself they were isolated cases or British propaganda. But the uncomfortable truth was that war had brutalized everyone it touched, turning neighbors against neighbors and ordinary people into instruments of violence. "Those weren't sanctioned operations," she protested, though the words sounded weak even to her own ears. "Weren't they?" Ashworth leaned forward, his grey eyes intense. "When authority breaks down, when everyone claims to act in the name of higher principles, who decides what's sanctioned? Your Continental Congress? They're 1,000 miles away and powerless to control what happens in the countryside. Your local commanders? They're too busy fighting for survival to worry about the niceties of civilized warfare." He rose and walked to a cabinet, retrieving a bottle of wine and 2 glasses. The casual gesture was somehow more unsettling than his earlier threats, suggesting a confidence that victory was inevitable. "You know what I find most interesting about you, Miss Montgomery? You're not motivated by hatred or revenge, like so many of your compatriots. You genuinely believe you're making the world better." Pouring wine into both glasses, he offered one to her, then remembered her bound hands and set it on the table within reach. "That idealism makes you dangerous, but it also makes you someone worth saving." "Saving?" Isabel couldn't hide her skepticism. "I hardly think execution qualifies as salvation." "Who said anything about execution?" Ashworth resumed his seat, sipping his wine with apparent enjoyment. "You're far too valuable to waste on a gibbet. Your intelligence, your contacts, your understanding of the local population, these are resources that could prove invaluable in bringing peace to this region." The offer hung in the air between them, unspoken but clearly implied. He wanted her to turn, to become a double agent working for the British cause. The thought made her stomach clench with revulsion, but she forced herself to consider it rationally. What would such a bargain actually entail? "You want me to betray everything I believe in," she said finally. "I want you to be practical," Ashworth corrected. "The war is lost, Miss Montgomery. Cornwallis's surrender at Yorktown was a tactical setback, not a strategic defeat. Britain still controls the seas, still holds key ports, still has the resources to continue this fight indefinitely. Your Continental forces are exhausted, your Congress is bankrupt, and your people are growing weary of the endless bloodshed." He gestured toward the window where British ships commanded the harbour. "Look around you. Charleston has been under our control for over 2 years, and life continues. Trade flows, families prosper, order prevails. Is that really so much worse than the chaos your revolution has brought?" Isabel followed his gaze, seeing the scene with unwelcome clarity. The harbour was indeed bustling with activity, merchant vessels loading cargo, fishing boats returning with their catch, children playing on the docks under their mothers' watchful eyes. It looked almost normal, peaceful even. "Peace built on subjugation isn't peace," she said, though her voice lacked its earlier conviction. "All peace is built on someone's subjugation," Ashworth replied matter-of-factly. "The question is whether that subjugation serves a larger good. British rule brings stability, prosperity, protection under law. Your revolution brings chaos, economic collapse, and rule by whatever strongman can gather the most armed supporters." The colonel leaned back in his chair, studying her reaction. "But I'm not asking you to abandon your principles entirely. Work with us, and you can help shape how this transition unfolds. Use your influence to minimize bloodshed, protect innocent civilians, ensure that when peace comes, it brings genuine benefits to the people you care about." It was a seductive offer, Isabel had to admit. Instead of dying as a martyr for a lost cause, she could live to make a real difference in people's lives. She could protect her remaining contacts from capture, guide British policy toward mercy rather than retribution, perhaps even save lives on both sides by helping end the conflict more quickly. But the price would be her soul. "What exactly are you proposing?" she asked, hating herself for the question, but needing to understand the full scope of his offer. "Continue your work, but report to me instead of your rebel handlers. Feed them information that will lead them away from successful operations, while providing intelligence that will allow us to capture their leadership with minimal casualties. Help us identify moderates who might be willing to negotiate, and isolate the extremists who would rather burn the country than see it unified under Crown authority." Ashworth's voice took on an almost hypnotic quality as he outlined his vision. "You could be instrumental in creating a new kind of colonial relationship, one based on mutual benefit rather than exploitation. Your insights into colonial thinking would be invaluable in crafting policies that serve both British interests and American prosperity." The plan was elegant in its sophistication, offering her a role as architect rather than victim of the post-war order. But Isabel could see the fundamental flaw in his reasoning. He still viewed the colonies as possessions to be managed rather than communities with the right to self-determination. "And if I refuse?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. "Then you'll hang as a spy, and nothing you fought for will have been accomplished," Ashworth said simply. "Your network will be rolled up within weeks. Your contacts will face the same choice you're facing now, and the war will continue until exhaustion forces both sides to accept terms far worse than anything I'm offering." He was probably right about the network, Isabel realized with growing despair. If her capture had been the result of betrayal, then the British likely had enough information to unravel the entire organization. Her death would accomplish nothing except to satisfy her own sense of honor, a luxury she might not be able to afford if it meant condemning others to the same fate. "I need time to consider," she said finally. "Time is something we have very little of," Ashworth replied, but his tone suggested he was willing to be reasonable. "Word of your capture will spread quickly. Your handlers will assume you've broken under interrogation and will begin relocating assets, changing communication methods, modifying their operational security. Every hour that passes makes my offer less valuable." The colonel stood and walked to the door, pausing with his hand on the latch. "I'll give you until sunset to decide, Miss Montgomery. Use that time wisely. It may be the last decision you ever make as a free woman." After he left, Isabel slumped in her chair as much as the ropes would allow, her mind churning with conflicting emotions and impossible choices. Through the window, she could see Charleston coming alive with the day's activities, merchants opening their shops, children playing in the streets, ordinary people pursuing their lives with the appearance of normality. Was Ashworth right? Had her idealistic vision of freedom and independence become divorced from the reality of what people actually wanted? Or was she simply seeing the surface calm that masked deeper currents of resentment and resistance? The questions tormented her as the hours passed, each potential answer leading to new dilemmas that seemed to have no satisfactory resolution. Don't miss the next chapter. What decision will Isabel make? And what shocking revelation will change everything she thought she knew? Subscribe now and hit the bell icon for more Revolutionary War spy thrillers that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Chapter 3. The Masquerade of Love. The afternoon sun had begun its descent toward the horizon when the door opened again. But this time, Ashworth wasn't alone. A young ensign followed him into the room, carrying a leather satchel and wearing the nervous expression of someone unaccustomed to dealing with prisoners. The colonel's demeanor had shifted as well. Gone was the calculating interrogator, replaced by something that looked almost like genuine concern. "Miss Montgomery," Ashworth began, his voice carrying a note of urgency that hadn't been present that morning. "I'm afraid circumstances have forced my hand. General Clinton has arrived in Charleston unexpectedly, and he's demanding immediate resolution of all pending cases. Your execution has been scheduled for dawn tomorrow." The words hit Isabel like a physical blow. Even though she had known this was a possibility, the reality of imminent death suddenly made all her philosophical wrestling seem like academic exercise. Tomorrow morning, unless something changed dramatically, she would be dead. However, Ashworth continued, settling into his chair with the careful precision she was beginning to recognize as his habitual manner, "I believe I've found a solution that might serve both our interests." Isabel studied his face, searching for clues about what new devil's bargain he was about to propose. The morning's offer of collaboration suddenly seemed almost generous compared to whatever desperate measure might save her from the gallows. "I'm listening," she said, though her voice was hoarse from hours of alternating between hope and despair. "Tell me, Miss Montgomery, are you familiar with the case of Maria von Trapp, Austrian noblewoman? Captured by French forces during the 7 Years' War, faced execution as a spy?" Ashworth's question seemed to come from nowhere, but Isabel sensed it was leading somewhere significant. "I'm afraid not," she replied, wondering where this historical digression was heading. "She was saved by a French officer who claimed she was his betrothed, kidnapped by Austrian agents and forced to work against her will. The French, being romantic by nature, were charmed by the story and granted her clemency." Ashworth paused, letting the implications sink in. "She later married the officer and lived quite happily in Paris, I'm told." Understanding dawned like a cold sunrise. "You're suggesting—" "I'm suggesting that Ensign William Morrison here witnessed a remarkable scene this afternoon," Ashworth said, gesturing toward his companion. "He saw me discover that the notorious Charleston Sparrow is actually Miss Elizabeth Ashworth, my own dear cousin, who disappeared from our family estate in Surrey 3 years ago." The ensign stepped forward, his boyish face flushed with either excitement or embarrassment. "Yes, sir. Most extraordinary thing, sir. The family resemblance is quite unmistakable now that it's been pointed out." Isabel stared at them both, her mind struggling to process the audacity of what they were proposing. "You want me to pretend to be your cousin?" "Not my cousin," Ashworth corrected gently. "My betrothed. You see, dear Elizabeth, as we must now call you, was promised to me in marriage before her mysterious disappearance. She was kidnapped by colonial rebels who forced her to work as a spy under threat of violence against our family. Now that she's been rescued, we can finally proceed with our long-delayed wedding." The fabrication was elaborate and, Isabel had to admit, clever. It would explain her knowledge of British military matters, her ability to move freely through loyalist society, and even her passionate defense of colonial rights. all the product of coercion and the natural spirit of a well-bred English lady forced into unpleasant circumstances. "And you believe your superiors will accept this story?" she asked. "They'll want to accept it," Ashworth replied. "General Clinton is under tremendous pressure from London to demonstrate both military success and magnanimous treatment of repentant colonials. Your case, properly presented, serves both goals perfectly. The notorious Charleston Sparrow, revealed to be a victim rather than a villain, saved by the devotion of her British lover. It's exactly the kind of story the Crown will want to publicize." Ensign Morrison nodded enthusiastically. "Beg pardon, miss, but the Colonel's right. The General's been looking for good news to send to London. Something to offset all the negative reports about partisan activities and colonial resistance. Your story would be a godsend for the propaganda ministers." Isabel found herself studying Ashworth with new eyes, trying to understand his motivation. This elaborate deception would save her life, certainly, but what did he gain from it? Surely a career military officer had better things to do than construct false identities for captured spies. "Why?" she asked simply. "Why what? Why are you doing this? What do you gain from saving my life, from creating this fiction?" She struggled against her bonds, frustration mounting. "You could have my intelligence value without the complications of a false betrothal. So why the masquerade?" Ashworth was quiet for a long moment, his grey eyes studying her face with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a note of vulnerability she hadn't heard before. "Because you're remarkable," he said simply. "This morning I expected to interrogate a common spy, extract whatever information I could, and proceed with a routine execution. Instead, I've spent the day with the most extraordinary woman I've ever encountered." He rose and walked to the window, his hands clasped behind his back, in a gesture she was beginning to recognize as habitual when he was thinking deeply. "You believe in something larger than yourself, with a purity that's breathtaking. You're willing to die for principles that most people barely understand, let alone embody. That kind of conviction, it's rarer than you might imagine." Isabel felt a flush of heat that had nothing to do with the humid Charleston air. There was something in his voice, in the careful way he wasn't looking at her, that suggested his interest might be more than professional. "You're asking me to betray everything I believe in," she said, though her protest lacked its earlier fire. "I'm asking you to live," Ashworth replied, turning back to face her, "to survive this war and help shape what comes after. Your death tomorrow accomplishes nothing except to satisfy your sense of honor. Your life, properly directed, could touch hundreds of others." The argument was seductive, but Isabel sensed there was more he wasn't saying. "And if I agree to this deception, what happens after the war? Do I remain Elizabeth Ashworth forever? Do we proceed with this fictional marriage?" "That," Ashworth said quietly, "would depend entirely on what you want. The betrothal provides legal protection and social standing, nothing more. What grows from it? That would be a matter of choice, not obligation." The implications hung in the air between them like morning mist, beautiful, insubstantial, and potentially dangerous. Was he suggesting genuine feeling might develop between them? Or was this simply another layer of manipulation, using her loneliness and fear to secure her cooperation? Ensign Morrison cleared his throat, diplomatically. "Begging your pardon, sir, but the General expects your report within the hour." Ashworth nodded, his attention returning to the immediate crisis. "Miss Montgomery, Elizabeth, I need your decision now. In 10 minutes, I'll either be reporting the capture and execution of the Charleston Sparrow or the miraculous discovery of my lost betrothed. There's no middle ground." Isabel closed her eyes, trying to think clearly through the fog of fear, hope, and confusion that clouded her judgment. Every choice seemed to lead to betrayal of someone or something she valued. But perhaps survival itself was a form of resistance, a refusal to let her enemies claim even her life as their victory. "If I agree," she said slowly, "what happens to my network, to the people who trusted me?" They scatter, reorganize, find new leadership, Ashworth replied. Some will be captured eventually, others will fade back into civilian life as the war winds down. But your cooperation will allow us to focus on high-value targets, rather than hunting down every courier and safe housekeeper. Fewer people die, on both sides. It wasn't the answer she wanted, but it was probably the best she could hope for. And perhaps, in whatever strange future this deception might create, she could find ways to protect at least some of the people she cared about. Very well, she whispered, the words feeling like stones in her throat. I am Elizabeth Ashworth, and I want to go home. Subscribe for the thrilling continuation. Will this masquerade of convenience become something real? What dangers await as Isabel navigates her new identity? Hit the notification bell for more Revolutionary War romance filled with passion, intrigue, and impossible choices.